I'd sat through hundreds of planning meetings over the past decade, but this one felt different, like a curtain quietly closing on a version of me I no longer recognized. It was a Monday morning in late October, crisp overcast. I was reviewing quarterly contractor bids in the West Conference Room of Monroe Developments, the real estate company my father had founded 40 years ago. At 30, I'd spent nearly every adult year of my life inside this building, first as an intern, then as a junior project manager, and eventually rising to senior operations director. Not by title, of course. My business cards just said project lead. Titles were for people who needed recognition. I didn't, or at least that's what I told myself. Avery, can you run the numbers on the Bridgemont permit delay? My father asked, eyes still on the spreadsheet, tone flat but expectant. Yes. Already did, I replied, passing him a printout before he even finished the question. He didn't look up, just nodded like I was a well-oiled tool. Reliable, efficient, replaceable. I used to crave moments like these where I could prove my value by being the one who always had the answers. But something had shifted lately. I wasn't sure when it happened. Maybe it was the day my sister came back. Maybe it had been building long before that. Madison Monroe, my older sister by 5 years, had returned from San Diego earlier that fall after her sustainable interior design startup folded. The family called it a pause, not a failure, the kind of vocabulary reserved for golden children. She arrived with a sleek new haircut, a photo series from Tulum, and a portfolio full of vague vision boards and phrases like biophilic synergy. My father welcomed her like a CEO welcomes an acquisition, eager, performative, strategic. Within 2 weeks, she had a glass office across from his and a vague title, Creative Director of Vision Alignment. No one knew what it meant, but no one questioned it either. Except me. At home, my mother said things like, Madison just needs a soft landing, and you've always been the stable one, Avery. Let her find her place. I smiled through it. I always did. That was my role. The stable one. The problem solver. The second daughter who didn't demand attention because she was too busy earning her seat at the table. The truth is, I didn't want a seat. I built the table. But no one seemed to notice. I was born into blueprints. I knew how to read a floor plan before I could spell vacation. I answered phones in this company, at 15 handled payroll issues by 18, and was managing cross-state permit filings before I could legally rent a car. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't the kind of person who gave TED Talks or pitched dreamy new projects at cocktail hours. I was the one who made sure the concrete was poured on time, the invoices were filed, and the crew had working restrooms on site. I never asked for more, never demanded a raise or a better office or a company credit card. I thought my work would speak loud enough. But silence, I've learned, isn't a language people in power bother to translate. That day, while Madison was ideating by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, I was handling a zoning miscommunication that could have cost us $150,000 in fines. No one saw it. No one thanked me. But that wasn't new. What was new was the growing awareness that maybe they never would. Dinner at the Monroe house always looked perfect from the outside. Polished floors, matching plates, warm lighting that made everything feel like a stock photo for family success. But under that glow lived a quiet imbalance, one that had started subtly like a picture frame just slightly off-center until now it felt like the whole room had shifted. That Sunday night, we were all seated around the dining table, my father, Richard Monroe, still wearing his work polo, like a badge of legacy. My mother, Catherine, passing around roasted duck with citrus glaze, and Madison, animated as ever, talking about her new client reactivation concept. I really think we can rebrand the Riverfront project as a lifestyle destination, she said, smiling over her wine glass. Something immersive, emotional, maybe even multisensory. That's brilliant, my father said without pause. Exactly the kind of thinking this company needs. I paused, fork halfway to my mouth. Riverfront. I'd been managing that project for 18 months. I'd finalized permits negotiated with the city council, tracked cost overruns, and coordinated every damn subcontractor from concrete to landscaping. And yet here we were calling it Madison's idea because she'd mentioned adding yoga decks and a juice bar. I glanced at my mother. She was smiling, nodding, refilling Madison's glass. Not once did she ask how many hours I'd spent dealing with the recent budget cut that had threatened to stall the entire riverfront development. Not once did she ask if I was okay, because I always was. I had to be. Maybe Avery can loop in the finance team, Madison added casually, as if I didn't already run those weekly calls. She's great with details. Great with details. That was my whole identity boiled down to a compliment that felt more like a box. She's the engine of this company, my mom chimed in, trying to soften it. And you're the vision, honey. I sat back in my chair, pressing my tongue against the roof of my mouth to keep from responding. There it was again. Madison got to dream, and I got to deliver. She got vision, I got engine grease. I used to tell myself it was just a phase, that Madison needed time to figure herself out, and I needed to be patient. But it had been years. Years of second chances handed to her, and invisible hours logged by me. When Madison's first venture tanked because she overspent on influencer campaigns and underdelivered on product, my parents helped her quietly dissolve the LLC. I was the one who reviewed the dissolution paperwork pro bono, of course. No one said thank you. It was just assumed I would help, because I was Avery, the helpful one. One time I asked my dad, half joking, half hopeful, what he'd name the next development project if he had full say. Monroe Legacy, he said proudly. I smiled. Nice ring to it. Sounds like a family monument. He nodded, then added without hesitation, would be great to have Madison front the brand. She's got the spark. That was the moment it hit me. He didn't see me as part of the legacy. I was the scaffolding, necessary, sturdy, and visible once the facade went up. I used to think hard work was a language, that if I spoke it fluently enough through consistency, through grit, through showing up even when I was sick or exhausted, someone would hear me. That effort would eventually be translated into trust, into ownership, into something I could hold. Instead, it just made me invisible. I started at Monroe Developments the summer I turned 20. While my college classmates interned at flashy tech companies or posted poolside selfies, I filed permits at City Hall and learned the difference between slab-on-grade and pier and beam foundations. My father said real success wasn't glamorous, it was systems consistency structure. So I built exactly that. By 23, I was managing full-site walkthroughs. By 25, I took over subcontractor vetting and safety compliance, an unsexy but essential part of any operation. When the accounting department got overloaded during tax season, I jumped in to reconcile ledgers. When the project leads in Denver burned out, I flew in and stabilized the site in under a week. I didn't complain, I didn't expect applause, I just handled it. I still remember the night the West Bay project lost power in the middle of a concrete pour. Our electrician had disappeared and the generator failed. I drove out at midnight in the pouring rain, found the short circuit myself, and called in a favor from a backup crew I'd kept on retainer just in case. We finished the pour by 4 a.m. No one outside the night team ever knew there'd been a crisis. The next day, my father complimented Madison's design proposal in the morning briefing. I hadn't slept in 30 hours. That became the pattern. I was the net beneath the high wire. I made sure no one fell, and no one ever looked down. There was always some fire to put out, a client threatening to sue over delayed HVAC installation, a supplier switching materials without notice, labor disputes, permit expirations. And through it all, I was the one with the clipboard, the late-night spreadsheets, the "I've got this" smile. Everyone relied on me, but no one asked what I needed. My mother once called me unshakable. I wore it like a compliment. Now I realize it was a way of saying, we'll keep leaning on you because you never say stop. And I didn't. I skipped vacations, took Zoom calls from my car, worked through strep throat and food poisoning. I missed my college roommate's wedding. I canceled 3 anniversary trips with my ex because project deadlines came first. He once asked me, "Do you ever get tired of being the one who always holds everything together?" I didn't know how to answer, because if I wasn't the glue who was, Madison came back like she'd never left. The family called it her homecoming, as if she were some war hero, not someone who'd burned through $700,000 of investor funding on a startup that collapsed in under 18 months. They framed it as resilience. "She's grown," my mother said. Sometimes failure teaches the best lessons. Failure in my case would have been treated as proof I wasn't ready. But for Madison, it made her relatable, marketable, a phoenix rising with a new brand story. Within 3 weeks, she had her own office. Not one of the internal cubes like mine, but a glass-walled corner suite fully redecorated, of course. Plants, statement lighting, a massive vision board pinned to one wall with color-coded Post-its and Polaroids of inspiration spaces. She started throwing around phrases like immersive lifestyle verticals and market texture shifts. No one understood what she was saying. Everyone clapped anyway. My father introduced her at the Monday all-hands meeting as our new strategic direction partner. No role description, no reporting structure, just a title that sounded important enough to excuse the fact that she didn't actually do anything measurable. She'll be focusing on creative expansion, he explained. We're excited for her vision. I sat 3 rows back, holding the project binder I'd spent my weekend assembling. Inside were 5 Gantt charts, 2 contingency matrices, and a complete site risk analysis for the upcoming Havenbrook development. I'd submitted it on Friday. No one had acknowledged it. But Madison had posted 3 mood boards on Instagram that got reshared by a design influencer. Apparently that was progress now. The shift was fast, almost surgical. Suddenly, I was being asked to loop Madison into meetings she didn't understand, to bring her up to speed. She'd show up late with an iced matcha and ask questions I'd answered in emails days earlier. "Wait, who's Kyle?" she asked in a development review. "Kyle's the lead architect. You've met him." "Twice," I said without flinching. "Right, I love his energy," she replied, as if that made up for not knowing the blueprint revisions were 2 weeks overdue. Afterward, my dad pulled me aside. "Just help her find her rhythm. You're good at systems. She's big picture." I wanted to ask what picture. Where was this grand vision she supposedly had? But instead I nodded, like I always did. Later that week, I overheard my mother on the phone with her friend. "Yes, Madison's really stepping in. Avery's still holding things down, of course. But Madison's ideas are just so fresh. Fresh. I don't think anyone had ever used that word about me. I was competent, steady, efficient, never fresh, never exciting, never the face of anything." At our next team lunch, they asked Madison to give a toast. She stood radiant in a linen blazer she hadn't ironed, holding a wine glass she hadn't poured. "I'm just really honored to be part of the next chapter," she smiled. "This company means the world to me." I watched as everyone raised their glasses. I raised mine too, but I didn't drink. I just looked around the room, realizing for the first time that maybe they were right. This was a new chapter. I just wasn't in it. The first crisis came less than a month after Madison's return. A miscommunication with our glass supplier nearly derailed the upper floors of the Eastbrook build. The specs had changed. Madison had floated a last-minute design revision without flagging procurement. The new dimensions didn't match the framing already installed. The supplier called me confused and irritated. "We need a signed confirmation or we're pulling the shipment. This is a liability risk." I spent the next 36 hours untangling it, called the foreman, rechecked the CAD drawings, sat in on a supplier call at 6 a.m. and stayed until nearly midnight drafting a modified compliance brief. I even covered the cost difference out of our discretionary budget to keep the delivery on schedule. When the panels arrived the next morning, no one on site knew there'd ever been an issue. By Friday, the marketing team posted a photo of the install with the caption, "Madison's clean, modern vision comes to life at Eastbrook." I stared at it for a long moment before quietly closing my laptop. It kept happening. A subcontractor filed a grievance one I settled with careful mediation and a rewritten safety procedure. A potential legal issue with a wetlands permit got flagged by the city. I stayed up till 3 a.m. drafting a correction plan. An investor started to pull funding. I met with him personally, presented projections, and secured a 6-month extension. And each time no one noticed, at least not publicly. But somehow Madison was always featured in the monthly newsletter. She oversaw a design transformation or streamlined cross-departmental alignment or led the creative concept for our new eco-campus. None of those things were real. None of them happened. But the optics, flawless. "She's making us relevant again," Dad told me after a partner meeting. Relevant doesn't keep deadlines, I said. He waved me off. That's your gift. You make the trains run on time. But Madison? She inspires people. I didn't respond. What was there to say? That I was tired of being the rails everyone ran on. That I was done being the infrastructure no one sees. Once I asked my mother if she ever thought I'd be next in line to run the company. She looked at me like I'd said something inappropriate. You're incredible at what you do, Avery. You make the company work. But leading. She hesitated, then softened her voice. You're just not the spotlight type. And that's okay. That was the moment I realized I wasn't seen as a contender. I was seen as a component. Valuable, yes, but interchangeable. Useful, but not essential. Replaceable. At the next board presentation, Madison fumbled through a vague update full of jargon and mismatched numbers. I sat beside her, silently watching the partners nod politely, pretending they understood. And when it was over, my father said, "Great job, Maddie. I can really see your leadership coming through." I wanted to laugh, or scream, or both. Instead, I just gathered my folders and left the room, quiet as ever. It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday lunch, just the four of us, me, Madison, and our parents, the kind of familiar gathering that felt more like a habit than an event. My mother had made her usual peach-glazed chicken, the one she only brought out for family moments. Dad sat at the head of the table, reading glasses perched on his nose, flipping through one of Madison's newest creative briefs. I recognized it instantly. Half of the content was pulled from our internal budget roadmap. My roadmap. Madison had changed the fonts, added a few stylized headers, and suddenly it was visionary. "I really think we should rebrand Havenbrook," she said casually, sipping her wine. "Make it more experiential. The market's craving that kind of emotional narrative right now." My mother nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, I love that. Something fresh, something soulful, soulful." It was a commercial, multi-use development. There wasn't a soul in sight. I took a slow bite, counted to 3. "We've already poured foundation." "Structural specs are locked," I said calmly. "Changing the format now would cost us hundreds of thousands." "Oh, of course," Madison said quickly. "It was just a thought." But then, Dad looked up. "Maybe it's time we take some creative risks," he said. "Madison's approach could help us attract a new demographic." I blinked. Was he serious? We're already meeting our occupancy targets. The budget is stable. Risking that for ambiance seems irresponsible. Dad's tone cooled. "Don't be dismissive. You've had your turn shaping operations. Now let Madison explore direction. Had my turn." The words hit like a cold slap. "You act like this is a family hobby," I muttered, pushing my plate away. "I've given this company 10 years. Madison shows up with buzzwords and a Pinterest account, and suddenly she's the future." My mother shot me a warning glance. "Avery, that's enough." "No," I said louder this time. "I've handled every crisis, every lawsuit, every blown inspection and staff turnover. I've stayed late, flown cross-country on 2 hours' notice, and run this place while Madison figured herself out." There was a silence. My father folded his napkin slowly. "And we appreciate that," he said. "But leadership isn't just about logistics. It's about inspiration." I laughed. Actually laughed. "So all this time you didn't think I was a leader?" Dad didn't answer. That was the answer. Across the table, Madison shrank slightly in her seat, not in guilt, but in discomfort, like she didn't want to be involved in something messy. My mother's voice was soft. "Sweetheart, it's not about comparison. You and Madison are just different." "No. We're not different. You just decided one of us was worthy of being seen." I stood up, grabbed my purse, and walked to the door. "You're not being fair," Mom called after me. I turned one hand on the knob. "I've been fair for 10 years, I said, voice calm but hollow. And it got me nothing. I closed the door behind me. Outside, the fall wind was sharp. For the first time in a decade, I let it sting. Because sometimes pain is the only thing real enough to wake you up. It started with a missing permit. We were prepping final documentation for the city inspector on the Harbor Line site. I needed the updated zoning approval, the one we'd refiled 3 months ago after Madison's creative revision to include a rooftop garden that had nearly violated height limits. But when I searched the digital system, it wasn't there. Again, the filing room had been streamlined recently under Madison's latest organizational initiative. In practice, that meant files were no longer where they used to be, and folder labels now read more like mood board titles than legal categories. I didn't trust anyone else to find what I needed, so I went in myself. Back corner, bottom shelf. Half an hour in, kneeling on the carpet with papers spread around me, I opened a drawer labeled Internal Legal Archive. Not what I was looking for, but a thick folder titled Transfer of Ownership, Monroe Developments caught my eye. I froze. My gut clenched before my hand even moved. I opened it slowly, not sure what I was hoping to see, maybe documentation for future planning, a draft for tax strategy, numb. It was final. Signed, stamped, witnessed. 75% ownership transferred to Madison Monroe, 25% retained jointly by Richard and Catherine Monroe. Effective March 3rd. There was no mention of me. Not as a shareholder, not as an executive, not even as staff acknowledgement. 16 pages. I scanned them all twice. No clause, no footnote, no contingency that involved me. It wasn't a restructuring. It wasn't a reallocation. It was a quiet erasure. My name, my work, my decade of sacrifice gone like I'd never existed in this company at all. I felt like the floor gave out from under me, like I was falling inside my own skin. I don't know how long I stood there holding the folder like it might burn through my fingers. The fluorescent lights hummed above, and the silence in the filing room grew louder than any meeting I'd ever sat through. I didn't hear Eleanor, our admin, approach until her reflection appeared in the file cabinet's glass door. "You shouldn't be in that drawer," she said softly. I didn't turn around. My voice was barely audible. "Did you know?" She hesitated. Too long. Then she looked down at her shoes. "Your father said he'd tell you when the time was right." I held up the signed page hand, trembling but controlled. 6 months ago. It's been 6 months. Her silence said everything I needed to hear. I walked past her without another word. I didn't stop at my desk. I didn't grab my laptop. I didn't even take my coat. I walked straight to my car and drove home, the folder strapped into the passenger seat like a witness I couldn't let go. Inside my apartment, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat at the kitchen counter, laid out the papers, and stared. They had taken everything. Not just my future, but the past I thought I'd built it on. My foundation wasn't real. It was scaffolding. And the moment they didn't need it, they pulled it down. For a long time, I did nothing. And then I started planning. The smell of roast chicken hit me before I rang the doorbell. Classic Monroe diplomacy. Feed first, deflect later. I walked in without knocking. Same house, same table, same voices. But everything felt tilted. Like a photo frame someone insisted was level, but you knew deep down wasn't. My father was in his usual seat, reading, glasses low on his nose, flipping through a new pitch proposal, probably another recycled slide deck from Madison. She stood at the kitchen island, wine glass in hand, laughing like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just inherited 75% of the company I built. "Avery," my mother called cheerfully from the stove. "Just in time. Sit, relax." I nodded, silent, and set my purse down. The folder was inside. Dinner was a performance. Madison talked about reimagining the digital experience for the Harbor Line project. My father beamed, nodding like she'd solved the housing crisis. My mother offered more potatoes, like the world wasn't about to tilt off its axis. I waited through appetizers, through the main course, through my mother's mid-meal commentary on weather and wine. Waited until dessert. She brought out peach pie, homemade, as always. My father loosened his belt. My mother smiled, reaching for the server. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. I set it on the center of the table, slowly, deliberately, like a weapon, like truth. The room paused. "What's this?" my father asked, tone neutral but sharp. "You tell me," I said. "Found it in the legal archive labeled confidential." His eyes dropped to the cover. I saw it, the flicker. Guilt, maybe, or just annoyance at being caught. I was going to talk to you about it. When I asked, before or after the next investor newsletter, or maybe after you handed me the next crisis to fix while Madison got a LinkedIn post about Vision Avery my mother started. No, I cut her off. You gave away my birthright without telling me. You erased me from something I've bled for. You made me invisible in the one place I built with my bare hands. There was silence, the kind that stretches too long, the kind that doesn't know how to apologize. My father's voice low. We thought it was best for the company. No, I said, pushing the folder closer to him. You thought I'd stay no matter what. I stood. My mother's hand froze midair with the pie server. Madison's wine glass stopped mid-sip. My father looked like he wanted to rewind time back to when I didn't question anything. I'm done, I said quietly. Done fixing what you break. Done being the one you lean on and overlook at the same time. Madison opened her mouth, then closed it. Even she couldn't spin this. I won't be in the office Monday, I added. Or Tuesday. Or any day after that. I turned, took my purse, and walked toward the door. The folder stayed behind. It belonged to them now. They could live with what they did. That night, for the first time in 10 years, I didn't set an alarm. And for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't theirs anymore. I didn't go back on Monday. Or Tuesday. No one called. Not my father. Not Madison. Not even Eleanor. Maybe they thought I needed space. Or maybe they thought I'd cool off and come crawling back like I always had. They underestimated how deep the cut was. On Wednesday morning, I logged into my work email for the last time, drafted my resignation with the precision they'd always praised me for: professional, factual, detached. Subject: resignation. Effective immediately, to whom it may concern. Effective today, I am resigning from my role at Monroe Developments. I will be using my accrued vacation leave to transition out per my contract. Please direct all future correspondence to Madison Monroe. No emotion, no goodbyes, just the truth. I didn't sign it best or sincerely, just Avery. Then I set my out-of-office reply. Thank you for your message. I am no longer available. For project-related matters, please contact Madison Monroe. And I closed the laptop. That night, when the office was empty, I returned for the last time. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the pavement. Inside, everything looked the same. Desks, coffee mugs, clipboards. But I wasn't the same. I moved quietly, packing only what belonged to me, my notebooks. A framed photo of Luna, my college dog. The tiny cactus that had somehow survived 5 years on my windowsill. I left the rest. The awards on the shelf, the desk chair I upgraded with my own money, even the backup flash drives because I no longer needed to be the safety net. I left a single note on my desk, centered beneath the Monroe Developments plaque, "Let your leader handle it." My keys went into an envelope marked HR. No signature, no closure. I walked out without looking back. But I knew one thing with certainty: they'd look for me the moment things began to fall apart. By Thursday, the first cracks appeared. A junior project coordinator forwarded me a panicked message thread. Subject: urgent, Anderson invoice rejected. Apparently someone had submitted the wrong vendor code. Again. I archived the email. On Friday, a voicemail came through from Grant's assistant. "Hi Avery, sorry to bother you. Mr. Grant has a few questions about the Harbor Line site budget. He said you'd know the numbers by heart. Could you call him back when you're free?" I wasn't free. I was finished. By Sunday night, my phone had 5 missed calls. The Anderson contract, the largest one we'd secured in 3 years, was at risk. Payroll had a delay. Site staff were confused. Madison had called an emergency alignment meeting that turned into a 4-hour spiral of jargon and buzzwords with no follow-through. Meanwhile, invoices backed up. Decisions stalled. Clients panicked. But I stayed silent. Each new ping, each new call felt like a confession from a system that had relied too long on one unacknowledged gear. And now that gear was gone. I didn't need to sabotage anything. All I had to do was nothing. That's what made it poetic. By Saturday evening, the doorbell rang. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The voicemail came seconds later. "Avery, this is serious. Grant's threatening to pull Anderson." Madison doesn't have the answers. We need you in the office Monday. Please. Click. No apology, no ownership, just panic. I played the message once, then deleted it. For the first time in my life, I felt no guilt in ignoring my father. Instead, I opened my laptop. Not for them. For me. I started pulling together what no one else had ever seen: the invisible architecture of the company. 10 years of operational wisdom, systems I built from scratch, budgets coded with my own formulas, Gantt charts, delivery schedules, subcontractor maps, client preference notes, birthdays, kids' names, even which vendor preferred phone over email. Information no CRM could replicate, because it wasn't just data, it was memory, muscle memory. By the end of the weekend, I had assembled a 22-page operational legacy report titled Monroe Systems: What Made It Work, compiled by Avery Monroe. No proprietary financials, no confidential client contracts, just one thing: undeniable proof of who had been running the machine. I labeled the file, printed it out, and closed the laptop. On Monday morning, I had coffee with Lillian Song, managing partner of one of our biggest competitors, Holloway & Brent. She greeted me with a smile, like she already knew this day would come. "We've followed your work for years," she said, flipping through the pages. "Frankly, I'm surprised you stayed as long as you did." I gave a small laugh. "So am I." The offer came before I even asked. Executive Director of Operations, profit sharing, full autonomy, mandatory 4-week vacation. I told her I'd review it with legal before signing. That afternoon, I called Margot Hayes, an old college friend, now working in employment law. We spread the draft across her kitchen island, marking clauses in red and blue. "This is solid," Margot said. "Better than most. And the PTO clause." "That's rare." I nodded, but I wasn't nodding for approval. I was nodding at the truth settling inside me. I was done proving myself to people who refused to look. That night, I drafted an email to Lillian. Didn't sign anything just yet, but my hands didn't shake when I typed, "Let's continue this conversation over lunch." And I knew whether my father called again or not, I'd already made the most important decision of my life. I wasn't going back. He didn't knock. Of course he didn't. My father had never knocked a day in his life, not on doors, not on decisions, not on me. He stood there, shoulders tight, folder in hand. No coat, no smile, just the quiet panic of a man who realized the infrastructure was crumbling. "We need you back," he said. No greeting, just war terms. "And good morning to you too," I said calmly, stepping aside. He entered, sat at my kitchen table like it belonged to him, laid the folder down between us with practiced precision. Anderson's threatening litigation. Staff are overwhelmed. Madison's trying, but she's out of her depth. I didn't blink. "What are you offering?" He straightened as if posturing still carried weight. "Title bump, Chief Operations Officer. Raise, private office. Autonomy. We can make it official by Friday." I tilted my head, unimpressed. "You want me to clean up the mess again?" "I want you back where you belong," he said quickly, almost tender. But I caught the word belong. Not own, not led. Belong, like a piece of furniture. I leaned back in my chair. "All right," I said. "Here's what I want." His eyes narrowed already on defense. 40% ownership, I began. Voting rights, board seat, guaranteed 45-hour workweek in writing. Any overtime must be compensated or banked as PTO. And Madison and I co-lead. She handles creative. I handle operations. Equal say, equal power. He looked like I'd spoken a foreign language. "That's unreasonable." I smiled. "No. What was unreasonable was expecting me to give you my life without a single signature to show for it. What was unreasonable was erasing me from the company I built. What's unreasonable is you thinking I'd still be grateful just to be included after all that. You'd risk everything over numbers on a page. I'm not risking anything," I said. "You are." He sat back quiet. The shift was visible, the realization that I was no longer pleading. I wasn't the scaffolding anymore. I was the architect. "You have 2 days," I added, standing. After that, Holloway & Brent's offer goes to signature. I didn't offer him coffee. I didn't ask if he was okay. And this time he didn't argue. He stood, gathered his folder, and walked to the door like a man who had finally seen the game board and realized he no longer held the queen. 1 week later, I would return, but not as the fallback, not as the fixer, as co-owner, as leader. But that's a different phase. This one ends with a closed door, and a woman on the other side of it finally setting her own terms. Exactly 1 week later, I walked back through the glass doors of Monroe Developments, not as a fallback, not as a fixer, but as chief operating officer and co-owner. It wasn't triumphant. It was surgical. I didn't want confetti or applause. I wanted order, structure, leverage. The reception desk fell silent as I passed. I caught the side glances, the half smiles, the nervous posture shifts. They'd heard. Word traveled faster than memos in this building. Madison stood at the elevator waiting. She looked composed, dressed sharply, as always. But there was something different now, an edge dulled. A little less center of gravity, a little more aware. "Welcome back," she said, voice neutral. I nodded once. Let's get to work. My new office wasn't on the top floor. No city skyline, no oversized window. It was on the operations level by design. I didn't need ego. I needed access. First order of business, restructure the chain of command. Too many bottlenecks. Too many approvals that filtered through charisma instead of capability. Second, project meetings. I reinstated Monday ops calls, set agendas, enforced time limits, no more open-ended brainstorming disguised as leadership. Third, staffing. I met one-on-one with every department head over the next 72 hours. Some had concerns, most were relieved, all were finally being listened to, and I listened closely. Every broken link they mentioned had Madison's name in it, misrouted documents, confused vendors, unpaid invoices. She wasn't malicious, just floating. Vision without ballast. I didn't call her out in public. I didn't shame her in front of the staff. But I did assign her a new role, head of creative strategy, external only. No more financial approvals, no more structural influence. She could pitch, she could present, but she couldn't execute. That was my domain now. By Friday, things had already shifted. Response times improved, client confidence returned. We secured Anderson's commitment through year-end. Even staff who once followed orders mechanically now volunteered input again. The building was breathing differently, like it had been suffocating under invisible weight and someone had finally opened the windows. I left that day at 5:30, not 9 p.m., not midnight. And as I stepped outside into a crisp early evening breeze, I realized something simple, almost laughable. I hadn't checked my phone once. No fire, no chaos, no last-minute plea to just handle it, because now it was built right, and this time I was the blueprint. The second week back, I made it clear things were going to change, and not in a company values poster on the wall kind of way. It started small. Every department now had to submit weekly status reports, no fluff, no buzzwords, just numbers, timelines, blockers, and direct asks. The first round was a mess. Vague phrasing, passive language. People weren't used to being this honest. But by week 3, patterns emerged. Problems surfaced. Delays that had been buried under polite silence were now seen named and assigned solutions. I moved our Monday meetings out of the boardroom. Too formal, too theatrical. I shifted them to the operations hub, standing tables, active screens, and no room for grandstanding. 10 minutes per project. Say what matters, skip what doesn't. Results first, then ideas, not the other way around. Some people adjusted quickly. They'd been waiting for this. Others struggled. Madison, for one. At first, she tried to blend in, nodding through meetings, scribbling notes like she had an action plan. But when I asked for follow-ups on vendor coordination, and she replied, "I think Eleanor's handling that," I corrected her gently but firmly. "No. If your name's on the slide, you own the outcome." She blinked, not used to being called out, especially not in front of others. But I didn't soften. This wasn't about punishment. It was about accountability. She'd always floated on potential. Now she had to function on performance. After that, she kept her updates shorter. She asked more questions, which I respected. Progress wasn't always fast, but at least it was real. I also implemented a 45-hour rule, and not just for me. Every executive had to log their hours for transparency. Anything over 45 had to be justified and pre-approved. No more hero culture. No more bragging about sleeping at the office or responding to emails at 1 a.m. We weren't building martyrs. We were building sustainability. One manager pushed back, said the clients expected round-the-clock access. I asked him for data. He didn't have any, so I asked the clients directly. Turns out they wanted better accuracy, not faster chaos. The biggest challenge came during a quarterly client review. Mr. Grant from the Anderson Project arrived expecting the usual presentation, long, bloated, full of adjectives. Instead, I gave him a 3-page packet. Bullet points, updated cost projections, delivery adjustments down to the week, new site photos, highlighted risk areas with proposed mitigations. He flipped through it slowly, then looked up. "This is actually useful." I smiled. "That's the goal." He leaned back in his chair. "You know, when you left, I almost pulled the contract." "I know," I said. "But you came back stronger," he added. "More grounded." "No," I corrected. "I came back with leverage." He laughed. "Fair enough." That night, I walked past the old hallway outside the executive suite. I saw Madison through the glass, sitting at her desk, alone, eyes locked on her screen. No wine, no Pinterest boards, just work. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry at her. I felt clarity. She was never the enemy. The real problem was the system that had fed her spotlight while demanding my silence. And I had dismantled that system, quietly, precisely, permanently. By the end of the second month, our numbers spoke for themselves. Project overruns dropped by 38%. Vendor response times improved by half. Staff turnover nearly non-existent. Client referrals had doubled. We didn't need miracles. We just needed boundaries. And someone who knew how to enforce them. And now we had both. I hadn't set foot in my parents' house since the night I dropped the folder on their dinner table. So when my mother invited us for Sunday brunch just to celebrate the company's turnaround, I knew what it really was: an assessment, a recalibration, a test. The table was already set when I arrived. Peach scones, creme fraiche, linen napkins folded into perfect triangles. Madison was already there, seated across from my father, swirling coffee in silence. She glanced up when I walked in. No smile, not quite a glare either, just something unreadable. Cold porcelain. "Morning," I said lightly. My mother kissed my cheek. My father muttered a greeting. Madison said nothing. The meal was fine. Talk circled around the usuals market trends. Permits a new zoning proposal in South Harbor. Polite, safe, plastic. But every time I offered a note about vendor projections or client needs, my father nodded quickly, too quickly, like a man trying not to flinch. And Madison tensed just barely. She kept sipping her drink, but her jaw flexed with every swallow. Finally, I set down my fork and broke the silence. "I know this isn't just about brunch." Madison looked up. "Oh, I know things feel different," I continued, "because they are." She tilted her head. "You think I'm threatened. I think we've reversed roles," I said calmly, "and you're not sure how to exist without the pedestal." That landed harder than I expected. My mother stiffened. My father closed his eyes briefly, like bracing for turbulence. "I never asked for a pedestal," Madison replied coolly. "No," I said. "You were just handed one, and when I walked away you realized it didn't come with a manual." She stood abruptly, pushing her chair back. "You act like you're some kind of martyr, like you're the only one who ever sacrificed." "I'm not a martyr," I said quietly. "I'm the architect, and I'm not here to burn the house down. I'm here to make sure it stands." There was a silence so sharp it hummed. My mother cleared her throat, offered a forced smile. "Why don't we—" "No," I interrupted gently. "This needs to be said." I turned back to Madison. "You still have a place in the company, but not above me, not instead of me. You'll earn your ground like everyone else." She held my gaze for 3 seconds too long, then walked away, grabbing her coat on the way out. The door didn't slam, but it might as well have. Afterward, my father walked me to the porch. We didn't speak for a while. Finally, he said, "You're doing well. Better than I thought." I nodded. Then he added, "She'll come around." I looked him in the eye. She doesn't have to. I didn't come back for family peace. I came back for fairness. And I meant every word. It had been 3 months since I walked back into Monroe Developments as co-owner, and for the first time in my entire career, I didn't feel like I was holding up the ceiling alone. Systems were humming, meetings ran on time, reports were clear, people knew who to go to, and it wasn't always me. That was the point. I didn't want to be the person everyone depended on just because no one else could do it right. I wanted to build a system that worked without me at the center. So I tested it. I stepped back. For 1 week, I didn't intervene unless absolutely necessary. I let team leads make calls. I didn't triple-check budgets. I watched timelines from a distance. When people asked for my input, I replied, "What do you think the best option is?" And you know what? Most of them were right. The second week, I delegated full oversight of the Kensington project, a 7-figure contract to Erica, a rising operations analyst who had once been too afraid to speak in meetings. She sent me a daily update, nailed the supplier issue before it became a crisis, and handled a client pushback with total professionalism. I sent her a handwritten note that simply said, "Excellent leadership. Keep going. Avery." Her thank you email had more gratitude than any award I'd received in 10 years. Meanwhile, Madison kept her head down. She showed up to creative briefings with actual market data, stopped name-dropping empty buzzwords, and started asking about feasibility. I wasn't sure if she was changing or just adapting. Either way, she stayed in her lane, and that was enough. My father stayed mostly quiet during board meetings, but he listened now. When I presented Q1 performance, he didn't interrupt. When I proposed adjusting vendor payment terms to improve cash flow, he just nodded and said, "Good catch." That used to be all I wanted, his recognition. But now I realized something I no longer needed it to define me. Outside the office, I started showing up in my own life again. I joined a gym, just twice a week, nothing ambitious, just movement. I bought groceries instead of ordering delivery. I sat on my porch at dusk with a book and no phone nearby. Sometimes I didn't read a word, just watched the light shift across the street. I even said yes to dinner with Malcolm, the environmental consultant I used to cancel on 5 times a quarter. He asked if I was finally off emergency mode. I laughed. "Still in recovery," I said, but the truth, I was stabilizing. One night after a long day, I came home and opened my laptop to check one last report. Then I paused, closed the lid, because nothing in that report was going to collapse without me. And that in itself was the quiet reward I never knew I was working toward, to build something solid enough to step away from. The next morning, I arrived at the office at 9:00. Not 7:00, not with a coffee in each hand and a to-do list in my teeth. I greeted people by name. I stopped by the design team just to check in, not to correct, not to supervise, just to see how things were going. At the end of the weekly operations meeting, as the room began to clear out, my father lingered behind. He looked at the charts, the team notes, the clear progress. Then he said, without looking up, "You were always the leader. I just didn't see it. I didn't say thank you. I didn't need to. I packed my binder, straightened my jacket, and walked out of the room no longer to prove anything, but because the next project was waiting. And this time, I was ready not to carry the weight, but to share it, to lead it, on my own terms." The spring board meeting started like any other. Coffee cups, clicks of pens, polite nods. The quarterly review packet was thicker than usual, not because of fluff, but because every chart had weight now. We weren't speculating anymore. We had numbers, we had retention, we had results. I stood at the head of the conference table and walked through each section. Budget efficiency up 17%. Vendor turnover reduced by 41%. Client satisfaction for the first time scored above 90% across all project tiers. No one interrupted. Not even once. I finished and asked questions. There were none. Instead, Harold, our longtime legal advisor, leaned forward and said, "On behalf of the board, I'd like to formally recognize the operational stability we've seen under Avery's leadership. It's measurable, and overdue. The rest of the board members nodded. A few even clapped. And then it happened, the moment I never thought would come. My father cleared his throat. "I'd like to propose a motion," he said, "to extend Avery's 40% equity into a permanent structure with equal tie-breaking rights alongside the CEO, and to establish her seat on the Executive Council as non-revocable." A pause. Not from resistance, but from quiet awe. He looked directly at me this time, his voice steady. "You built the framework we now depend on, and I want that enshrined, not just assumed." I blinked. Once, calmly, then nodded. "I accept." The vote passed unanimously, and just like that, my name wasn't just on the dotted line, it was written in ink that wouldn't fade. After the meeting, Madison caught up with me in the hallway. She looked composed but less guarded than before. No shields, no performance. "Hey," she said. "Hey, I heard about the vote," she added. "Congrats. It's well-deserved." "Thanks," I said, letting the air hang for a beat. "Really." She shifted her bag on her shoulder, then looked down. "I know I made things harder," she admitted. "I wasn't ready when they put me in charge. I thought I had to fake it until I figured it out. But you didn't fake anything. You just knew what had to be done and did it. I didn't gloat. I didn't dig in, because this wasn't about revenge anymore. That part was long gone. It wasn't just knowing what to do," I replied. "It was knowing I could survive doing it alone." She gave a sad smile. "Well, you don't have to anymore." We didn't hug. We weren't there yet. But as she walked away, I knew something had shifted. Not just in her. In me. That evening I stayed late, not out of pressure, but by choice. I walked the floor quietly like I used to, but this time it wasn't about fixing broken things. It was about witnessing what I'd helped build. The lighting was soft, the silence was peaceful. Across the bullpen, Erica was wrapping up a call. One of the interns was laughing softly while restocking the supply cabinet. A low playlist hummed from design. It felt whole, stable, sustainable, real, and most importantly, mine in a way it had never been before. The Monday after the board vote, I received an email marked Confidential Expansion Proposal. It was from Harold. Attached was a draft motion to offer me the CEO position outright. Subject line, Leadership Realignment Recommendation. For a second, I just stared at it. My name. That title. The role I'd spent a decade proving I could handle without ever being given the chance. I opened the attachment. It was all there. Elevated compensation. Full strategic control. An appendix with press release drafts and internal announcements. The final clause read, "Pending Avery Monroe's acceptance, effective next quarter." I closed the laptop and sat still, not from shock, but from clarity. Later that afternoon, I met with Harold in his office. He looked up with a hopeful smile. "I take it you saw the draft I did?" He waited. "And I'm honored," I said sincerely. "But I'm not accepting." His eyebrows lifted confused. "May I ask why?" "Because I don't want to lose what I've rebuilt." He leaned back, listening. I explained I've structured my department. I've trained leaders. I've restored systems. For the first time in 10 years, I'm not the one catching fires at midnight. I'm sleeping. I'm exercising. I'm actually living. I paused, then added, "Taking the CEO seat would undo that balance. I'd fall back into being everything for everyone all the time. I know what that costs, and I won't pay that price again." Harold nodded slowly, respect deepening behind his glasses. "You're the first person I've seen decline power from a place of strength," he said. "It's not a decline," I replied. "It's a decision." That evening I closed my laptop at exactly 5:30. Not 5:31. Not just one more email. Just done. I walked out of the office and didn't bring work home. No reports in my bag. No calls on silent. Just me, present, unburdened. I met Malcolm for dinner at a quiet Mediterranean place by the water. He ordered grilled octopus. I had lemon chicken and a glass of wine. We talked about everything but work mountain trails, a podcast about curiosity, the time he got lost in Portugal, and ended up at a goat farm. At one point, he looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "You're lighter now." "I am," I said. What changed, I thought for a moment, then smiled. I stopped mistaking being needed for being respected. He raised his glass. "To choosing yourself." We clinked. And I meant it. Later that week, my team surprised me with a small celebration, just bagels, fruit, and a hand-painted mug that said, "Blueprint Boss." Erica gave a short toast. "We used to survive," she said. "Now we grow because someone believed structure wasn't the enemy of creativity, because someone made room for us to rise." I felt my throat tighten just a little. Not out of pain, out of recognition, and for the first time I allowed myself to feel it. Pride. Not the loud chest-thumping kind, but the quiet kind, the kind that settles into your bones like warmth. I still worked hard. I still made decisions, signed contracts, mentored team leads. But I didn't bleed for it. I didn't hollow myself out to prove my worth. I took Fridays off when I needed them. I scheduled walking meetings instead of locking myself in boardrooms. I let others make mistakes and learn from them. Because real leadership isn't about being irreplaceable, it's about making sure the system doesn't collapse when you're not there. And finally, that was true. On a warm Sunday afternoon, I visited my parents. No tension, no agenda, just brunch and boundaries. My mother offered me her usual peach scones. My father asked casually, "How's it feel not being the fire extinguisher anymore?" I smiled. It feels like peace. I returned to the office late one evening, not for work, but to grab a book I'd left behind. The building was quiet, dark. A few motion lights flicked on as I walked past empty cubicles, silent conference rooms, and the hallway that once felt like a battlefield. I paused outside my old office, the one I used to occupy before the fallout, before the shift, before the quiet revolution I led with no title, no backing, and no guarantee. The desk was still the same. The chair I once picked out after hours of research still sat in the corner. My old whiteboard was wiped clean, but a faint trace of ink remained a forgotten timeline, a phase marker, maybe even a note to myself once scribbled in desperation. I stood there for a long time, not grieving, not reliving, just acknowledging. All the moments no one saw. The nights I stayed until 2 a.m. fixing bid errors. The weekends I skipped because reports wouldn't finish themselves. The flu I worked through with a blanket over my lap and tea in hand. Back then I thought sacrifice would earn me belonging. Now I knew better. I walked out and made my way to the rooftop terrace, the one hardly anyone used because it didn't have Wi-Fi. I sat on the bench by the railing, watching the lights of the city blink to life below. From here I could see the entire block Monroe had helped build: restaurants, condos, offices. Structures I'd once overseen down to the last bolt and beam. A cool breeze swept through. I breathed in slowly, and for the first time it didn't feel like I was holding my breath, just breathing. Fully. Freely. Somewhere below, Madison was probably reviewing campaign metrics. Erica was likely finalizing onboarding docs for new hires. My father might be on a call with a legacy client using language I once fed him through carefully written scripts. They were all fine, better than fine, and they weren't calling me, weren't depending on me to fix it, because I'd already done my part. I'd laid the foundation, and now they were building atop it. That was the win. Not the office, not the title, not even the ownership papers with my name carved in ink. It was this knowing I could leave and it wouldn't all fall apart. I opened the book I'd retrieved a gift from an old professor years ago. Inside the cover was an inscription: "Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what lasts without you." I ran my fingers over the words, then smiled. That was it. The whole journey, distilled. I didn't need anyone to call me irreplaceable anymore. I had become unnecessary, and that was the most powerful place to stand. As I stood to leave, I looked one last time at the skyline, not to say goodbye, but to mark it in memory. This wasn't the end of a battle. It was the dawn of balance. People kept asking me in quiet conversations, elevator chats, even text messages, "How did you do it? How did you take everything back?" And I always hesitated before answering because the truth is, I didn't take anything back. I just stopped giving it away. For years, I believed I had to earn my seat by bleeding for it, by saying yes, by staying late, by being silent when passed over and grateful for scraps of praise. I used to think that loyalty meant endurance, that love meant obedience, that proving myself was just part of the process. But somewhere between the betrayal and the rebuild, I realized something deeply uncomfortable and completely freeing. You can be the most competent person in the room and still be invisible if you stay silent. And silence doesn't make you noble, it makes you forgettable. I didn't reclaim power by yelling or by fighting louder than my family. I did it by making choices one after another that said, I know what I'm worth. I don't need you to validate it. When they gave away the company without telling me I left. When they called me back in a panic, I didn't gloat. I negotiated calmly, precisely, without apology. When they offered me the highest title, I said no, not from fear, but from freedom. And when they finally said the words I'd once prayed to hear, you were always the leader, I didn't break down. I didn't celebrate. I simply nodded, because I already knew. People think revenge is loud, that it's some dramatic mic drop moment with applause and regret. But real revenge, the kind that lasts. It's this, walking into a room where they once doubted you and not needing them to look anymore. I don't burn bridges, but I've learned to build better ones with gates and locks and keys I don't hand out just because someone shares my blood. This isn't a story about triumph over others. It's a story about coming home to myself, and that to me will always be the real win. If you've ever been told you're not leadership material, I see you. If you've ever sat through a meeting or a dinner or a birthday smiling politely while someone else took credit for your work, your strength, your resilience, I see you. If your family ever made you feel like the stable one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need the spotlight or the support, or even the bare minimum of acknowledgement, I see you. And I want to tell you something that took me years to believe. You don't have to become louder, sharper, tougher to prove your worth. You just have to stop shrinking. For the longest time, I thought loyalty meant staying even when it hurt. I thought it was my job to keep everything running smoothly, to fix the chaos others created, to accept silence as gratitude, to work twice as hard so they'd love me half as much. But here's the truth I learned the hard way. If they only value you when you're convenient, it's not love. It's dependence. And if they panic when you walk away, it's not because they finally saw your worth. It's because they lost their safety net. You are not scaffolding. You are not the back office to someone else's performance. You are not born to be the helper, the fixer, the afterthought. You are the structure, the foundation, the engine that's been running quietly until now. I won't tell you to walk away from your family, but I will tell you this. You have permission to redefine your role even if it makes them uncomfortable. You have permission to stop proving, to stop pleasing, to stop hoping they'll notice you when they only ever looked through you. You do not have to explain your boundary for it to be valid. You do not have to accept crumbs just because they come with a familiar voice. You do not have to stay small just so someone else can feel big. The world tells people like us, the dependable ones, that we are strong. But strength without boundaries becomes exhaustion. It becomes burnout. It becomes resentment. And resentment disguised as duty is a slow, silent poison. So here's what I've learned. Power doesn't come from titles. Respect doesn't come from inheritance. Peace doesn't come from people finally changing. It comes when you change. When you decide that the version of you who keeps apologizing for existing has no place in the life you're building. I'm not angry anymore. Not at my father, not at my sister, not even at the girl I used to be, the one who believed she had to stay invisible to stay loved. Because she got me here. She endured long enough for me to rise. So I thank her, and I let her rest. Wherever you are in your story, whatever role they've cast you in, you can rewrite it. You are not too late. You are not too quiet. You are not too much or not enough. You are exactly the person who's allowed to take up space. Start there, Saturday morning. The sunlight streamed through my kitchen window, hitting the mug I always reached for, the one that said, Blueprint Boss. I smiled to myself, not because of the title, but because I remembered the day my team gave it to me, laughing, confident, fully themselves. I took my coffee out to the porch, barefoot, no to-do list in sight. Across the street, a neighbor's kid was learning to ride a bike. The wobbles, the sudden confidence, the little gasp when balance held. It reminded me of something, of becoming. For years, I had moved through life like I was on rails, committed to a destination I didn't choose, fulfilling a legacy I didn't design. But now I had space, and stillness, and silence, not the empty kind, but the kind that holds. I no longer needed validation from people who couldn't see me, because I had seen myself, and I had chosen her. You don't have to wait for permission, not from your parents, not from your boss, not even from the version of you that still whispers, "Maybe I'm not ready." You are allowed to walk away from roles that don't fit, even if they've been yours for years. You are allowed to choose peace over proving. You are allowed to write your own title and build your own blueprint, not out of rebellion, but out of clarity, because being overlooked isn't your fault. But staying invisible, that's a choice. And now you get to choose differently. So if you've ever felt like the lesser sibling, the background worker, the one they assumed would never leave, I invite you to ask, what would happen if I stopped explaining and just became, stop dimming your light for people committed to shadows. Step forward, not to shout but to stand, not to fight but to own. The story doesn't end when they recognize you. The story begins when you recognize yourself. Follow this channel for more family revenge stories that aren't really about revenge, but about freedom. And if this story hit something real in you, share it. Let someone else know they're not alone, because maybe today is the day they stop shrinking too. Fade out with soft piano and Avery walking quietly back inside, door closing behind her, not as an exit but as a beginning.